Deputy Broughan.
Thanks, Cahill. Tomorrow, of course, is International Workers' Day, and it's astonishing, Minister, that a government with Labour ministers would have countenanced the privatisation of significant portions of the Dublin bus and bus area networks. And I think the stonewalling of the NBRU and SIPTU trade unions by you, Minister, and by your colleagues has brought us to the awful situation tomorrow, where between 400,000 and 450,000 bus commuters are left with no bus transport on tomorrow and Saturday. And I think 93% of Dublin bus, 95% of bus area staff felt they had no choice a few weeks ago but to vote for strike action. And we've now just had this news flash that the strike is actually going ahead, which is really disappointing, Minister. We were welcoming, obviously, that there was some engagement at the LRC. I think both SIPTU and NBRU have outlined their profound concerns for the future pay and conditions of the workforce resulting from the proposed tendering and privatisation of Dublin City and national routes. And recent assurances from the companies and you, Minister Donoghue, may be worth no more than similar assurances given to the Aer Lingus workforce, as Deputy Daly said, in fact, earlier today. And of course, we have the example of the UK since the Thatcherite mid-1980s, where the national public bus network was privatised, and eventually it ended up as a cartel geographically between 5 operators. Now, Taoiseach Kenny and yourself, you've gone on and on about in recent days about the €90 million subsidy, PSO subsidy. You didn't mention, in fact, of course, that the subsidy has been slashed by you and your predecessors since 2011, year after year after year, by what was it, 15 million or so in the case of Bus Éireann, and down from 50 million to 34 million. And in the case of Dublin Bus, in fact, it only represents, as I said, something like 30% or less than 30% of turnover, whereas in many European countries the PSOs, of course, are well over perhaps 70% of turnover. Both companies have produced surpluses in recent years. Both have brought forward many driver and route efficiencies. We've had Network Direct in Dublin. So it's very disappointing, Minister, even at this 11th hour, the negotiations haven't succeeded. And I urge you strongly to address the final point, the 6 areas of concern to the 6,000 staff and their trade union representatives. For example, what progress has been made, in particular on the registered employment agreement? It's my personal view, though, Minister, you should simply abandon this crazy plan and put all your resources into having a proper Dublin bus and national bus service.
Thanks. Thank you, Deputy Broughan. Deputy Boyd Barrett.
Yeah, Minister, if you want to avoid major disruption to hundreds of thousands of people over the May Day bank holiday and prevent workers who don't want to be on strike from having to go on strike tomorrow, the time is to abandon this crazy plan to privatise 10% of the routes in Bus Éireann and Dublin Bus. You see, there can be a lot of mud thrown and confusion sown on this issue, but the bottom line is this is the beginning of a drive, an ideologically driven attempt to privatise bus services. And the consequence of that will be to assault the paying conditions of bus workers and to affect in a very adverse way the public transport system as a public service for those that need it. And to essentially what you're about is driving it to being a purely profit-orientated business, and that is absolutely retrograde and should be abandoned. My own area is going to be devastated by this first round of privatisation. 6 routes, the 75, the 45A, the 59, the 63, the 17 and the 114. And what characterises many of those routes, not all of them, is precisely that they serve, if you like, areas a little bit off the beaten track, would have a lot of elderly people on them, a lot of young people on them. They wouldn't necessarily be big profit routes. And if this thing goes ahead, these routes will be lost sooner or later. There is no other way that private companies could make money off these other than by cutting the routes, cutting the service or attacking the paying conditions of the workers in there. And the simple fact, Minister, and I can conclude on this, The simple fact, the problem with public transport in this country is we provide the lowest subsidy to public transport virtually anywhere in Europe, at 29%. It's 39% in London, 57% in Zurich, 79% in Lyon, 68% in Brussels. That's the problem. We're underfunding public transport in order to force it towards privatisation. We should abandon that, and that's how we'll avert this strike tomorrow.
Thank you, Deputy Boy Barrett. And now call on Deputy Timmy Dooley.
Minister, I think it's deeply unfortunate that we find ourselves at the 11th hour where tens of thousands of people over the next number of days are going to be without public transport. The blame lies firmly at the feet of this government. The decision was taken by a Labour minister in consultation with Minister Varadkar prior to your time, but notwithstanding that, it is an ideological situation that has been pushed by Fine Gael, and it's leading to this crisis. Now, yesterday you used an opportunity to suggest that it was the decision taken by a previous government that led to this. You full well know that the 2008 Act was based on a European Commission regulation of 2007 that required legislation to cover competition. The legislation that was introduced in 2008 at section 52 sets out very, very clearly that the existing routes could be maintained by both Bus Éireann and Dublin Bus based on an awarding mechanism that would see them retain what they currently have. Now, you have chosen to, instead of using the provisions in the legislation, to look to having competitive tendering for new routes, thereby protecting the core public transport network, using section 52 to do the direct award, which would retain and protect the core network. Your government has chosen not to use the legislation, or indeed the agreements that have been reached with unions at the time. You have chosen a path of dismantling the public transport system to be as retained in public ownership. And that's why the workers rightly identify, on behalf of the next generation, that if they don't take a stand now, commuters, exactly as my colleague have said, will be disenfranchised and routes and services will fall off and diminish, in line with what happened in other jurisdictions, particularly in London. I would appeal to you, Minister, today, through the NTA, to call off the process of competitive tendering, go back to the table and look at how you can achieve whatever your ideology is in a manner that doesn't impact on either the travelling public or the workers.
Thank you, Deputy Dooley. Minister, you have 4 minutes to reply.
Thank you, Deputies, and thank you, Cathaoirleach, for allowing the raising of an issue that I know is of huge concern to commuters throughout the country and to the workers in our public bus companies. On Tuesday, I issued a statement which dealt comprehensively with the industrial relations issues involved in the current dispute between SIPTU, NBRU and the bus companies. I confirmed then that no current employee of the two companies would have to transfer to another company should their company be unsuccessful in retaining one of the routes being tendered out in the current process. As this means that the terms and conditions of all those employees are fully protected, my statement provided a framework for the unions to return to the LRC to formalise an agreement with companies on the basis and to agree a process to deal with any issues that may arise during implementation. This statement removed any industrial relations basis for strike action by either union against the companies and should therefore have led to an immediate calling off of the strikes planned for this weekend and on 5 subsequent days in May. This has not happened, and attempts have been made to justify the disruption this will cause to the public and damage this will cause to the companies by reference to a range of matters which have already been addressed or which relate to government policies and legislation which are entirely outside the control of the companies and not a valid basis for legitimate industrial action. So, to remove any doubt or confusion which may exist in the public mind, I want, in the short time available to me, to address again some of the points raised by SIPTU and the NBRU. First, they have stated that no bus worker should be compelled to move to a private operator under 2P. As stated, I confirmed on Tuesday that such a commitment can be given in relation to all current employees for the tender process now underway. The unions have also said that the NTA must effectively regulate private operators who breach workers' conditions of employment. This is not an IR matter between the unions and their companies, and therefore isn't a valid basis for industrial action. However, the National Transport Authority has already indicated that the Labour Relations Commission that it will develop a basic set of principles for inclusion in a statement of contractor employment standards for contractors on relevant public transport service contracts. This would indicate that it is NTA policy to ensure contractor compliance with employment law, and the authority will apply a performance regime that would include deductions where breaches of contract obligations have been verified and not dealt with. The ultimate sanction, of course, is termination of the contract. The trade unions have stated that labour costs must not be a considering factor in the contract tendering process. However, this is not an industrial relations matter between the unions and the two companies, and therefore is not a basis for industrial action against the companies. Furthermore, this is not a provision used in the tendering process. They have said that where legacy costs arise from lost tenders, workers must not be asked to fund these through restructuring. The companies have already given this commitment and will restate it in discussions at the LRC. In any event, legacy costs will not be significant because of growth in the overall market. And in conclusion, Cathaoirleach, they've said that registered employment agreements for bus workers should be entered into by employers. The Government has approved the drafting of legislation on REAs and sectoral employment agreements, which is due to be published within weeks. Following enactment, it would be a matter for parties involved in the bus market as to whether they want to instigate discussions on REAs or approach the Labour Court for a sectoral employment order. Therefore, this isn't a valid basis for industrial action. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you, Minister. Deputies have 3 minutes in total for supplementary statement. Deputy Brown.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. Well, the Minister has mentioned a statement of contractor employment standards, SCS, for private operators, on proposed private operators and 10% on the PSO routes. But the reality is, Minister, that across a wide range of policy areas, you can think of finance, banking, energy, communications, regulation simply hasn't worked. It's totally failed. We've cartels, we've in energy people charging what they like. So I think there's no comfort being given to workers by that. I asked you also about the registered employment agreement. You say to be published. Why isn't it published? Why haven't this work been done? You say they can go on and make sectoral employment orders. But again, you're given no details. There's nothing here for very worried workers and their families. I think basically you referred to TUPE. We know the weaknesses of TUPE in relation to pensions, doesn't cover pensions and so on. I mean, there's no basis in EU or Irish law for the steps you are now taking. We don't need this privatisation. It's not necessary. It was foisted on us, I have to say, by the late Minister Tommy Broughan of Fianna Fáil. This is a Fianna Fáil production now being directed by Fine Gael to bring us a privatised public bus sector. The two of you will probably be together after the general election in a Fianna Fáil Fine Gael government. This is what's been planned. This is what the Irish Independent wants to happen. Maybe Fine Gael 8 seats in cabinet. Fianna Fáil. You invented this. The late Tommy Broughan wanted to privatise a quarter of the bus network. Now, I urge you, Minister, and I would urge Labour ministers to abandon this policy, to just stop it, get on, bring the resources you need to Dublin Bus and to Bus Éireann and produce the kind of good bus service that we want. Don't bring us down this road which has ended up with cartels, with price gouging in the UK, overseen by the current Conservative government.
I'm calling Deputy Thanks,
Minister, particularly when you hear your response, which just fails to address either the questions we asked or, more importantly, the concerns that are driving the bus workers to go out on strike tomorrow. I have to say they are absolutely right and justified to carry on with that industrial action to force you to back down. This is about your policy, not all these technicalities and legalities. It's about your policy and your drive and the obsession of Fine Gael in particular to privatise public services. And we need to be absolutely clear, and the public need to be clear, that when those workers go out and strike against privatisation, they are acting in the interests of the entire public. As a result of privatisation, there will not be one single extra bus route or bus journey on any of the routes that are outsourced. Not one. The only thing that will change is that in order to make money, those private contractors will have to cut the wages and conditions of workers, or cut the services, or both. And in the long run, particularly services like the ones I mentioned in outlying areas, of which our area is going to be particularly hard hit, those services will just go, because they won't be seen as profitable from the point of view of profit-hungry contractors. So we're saying, abandon the plan to dismantle the public transport system. It is wrong.
I'm calling now Deputy Dooley.
Thanks very much, Cathaoirleach. Minister, yet again you have announced what you believe to be the solution to this strike, that workers could remain with the two parent companies. And all you do every time you reiterate that is prove that this is ideology over economics from your government's perspective. Because the fact of the matter is, if Bus Éireann and Dublin Bus have to retain staff that they no longer require because they no longer retain the services, they're going to become more inefficient, making it more difficult for Bus Éireann and Dublin Bus to compete for the awards which you'll be issuing in 2017 towards 2019. And it's not acceptable to say that somehow, because of growth in the market, that these people will be subsumed into those companies. Because if you dismantle the Bus Éireann network in Waterford and the growth is in Dublin, do you expect these workers to travel from Waterford to Dublin to work? It's farcical, Minister. I know it was about putting your finger in the dam of the strike that's emerging. Deputy Dooley. But it undermines the efforts that you're making if it is supposed to be done under value for money. So will you please come forward, accept that the proposal based on Fine Gael ideology is wrong, pull back at this late hour, ask the NTA to step down from their situation of competitive tendering.
I'm going to call the minutes for 2 minutes.
And then I just want to ask you two other things, Minister. As the strike is going ahead, if you're not prepared to do that tonight, will you do things? Will you ask Éireann Road Éireann to halt the works that are planned on the rail network over the weekend? And will you sign whatever order is appropriate to open up the bus lanes so that commuters have access to them during the strike period?
Thank you, Deputy Dooley. Minister, to a concluding statement.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Anybody who is going on strike tomorrow will not find themselves in a position that they are required to change company due to the tendering process that is underway. It is an intervention that's unprecedented in the recent history of both companies. It was made by this government because I recognise the concerns that workers have regarding a change. What I'm also very conscious of is what will happen tomorrow will cause immense harm to the company and to the travelling public. The losses for both companies will be in the millions of euro. Millions of journeys will be affected by what will happen and could yet happen tomorrow. The Labour Relations Commission and all that's available there provided a forum within which the framework that I've outlined could have led to dealing with detailed matters of implementation that would have allowed the residual issues that did exist to be dealt with. One matter that has been further emphasised across today is the issue of legacy costs. Now, I've emphasised again here in the Dáil this evening, as I have done earlier on, is that legacy costs as a result of this process would not have to be dealt with by the companies. But one thing that I am struck by here is as a result of what could happen tomorrow, great legacy costs will be conferred on both companies due to the scale of strike action that will happen. And I will not be asking the taxpayer to pay for that cost. What we will have, I believe, is a bigger bus market with a bigger Bus Éireann and bigger Dublin Bus within it. And what I'm looking for is, as we increase investment in both of those companies, that we do so in a way where the best value can be gained for the taxpayer and where a degree of tension can be introduced for that market to ensure that services are provided well and taxpayers' money is well spent.
Thank you, Minister. The next topical issue is Deputy Sean O'Fergal. to the Minister of Finance the status of integration